Good evening, everyone. This is Citlali from Nican Tlaca WomenWarriors Fight, and we want to welcome everyone that's listening. Tlasokamati, thank you for tuning in. We have Shoshishiwit with us, Iyari, and our very special guest is Brother Huitziliolot Xocoat Anahuac. Just to let you know, every once in a while, we do want to invite our people on the podcast to be able to discuss, concepts at length. Our writers, our philosophers, our people that are basically decolonizing out there. We want to start off with Huitziliolot before he reads us his writing, which is very interesting, and this is something that he's been doing for a while now. It's known as the Sunday Sermons, and we're not talking about church, so just to let you know. So he's gonna explain that. So just to introduce who Huitziliolot Xocoat Anahuac is. He's our brother, okay? He's our brother. He's been decolonizing for 7 years. He received his bachelor's in Chicano Studies from Fullerton, Cal State Fullerton, and then later on went on and received his master's at Northridge from Chicano Studies. You can follow him on Instagram under Huitziliolot, and he writes a lot on Facebook and Instagram. So to begin, I want to introduce him, and first of all, thank him for being here with us. And just if you can explain first off, what inspired you to start a Sunday sermon? Because a lot of people are probably like, why a Sunday sermon? So, and share with us what you wanted to write about it.
Temeshika. So I came up with this concept because, when I was, colonized, I used to be a Christian. And, obviously we have Sunday sermons. So then as I was decolonizing, I was like, well, how can I flip the script basically? So, or how do I grab people's attention? Because most of our people are still Christian, still Catholic. So it was a way to grab people's attention when they say, oh, Sunday sermon. And so let me read it. But then it's not what they're going to expect. It's not about God. It's about our people, our history, our issues. And so it was a way to kind of play with this concept and to attract people. And so yeah, that's basically what it was. And I'm gonna start my sermon. It's gonna be about Nican Tlaca and why that's a great label to just identify ourselves with, whether or not we know who we are or we don't know who we are. It's about being pan-indigenous. And so yeah, okay, there you go. So today's Sunday sermon. In order to reclaim our Nican Tlaca identity, it is imperative that we have a clear understanding of who we are before the invasion and colonization of our people. The accomplishments of various Nican Tlaca nations such as the Olmecs, Maya, Mexica, Inca, and the alike share a common legacy as people from Semanahuac, the one land surrounded by water, in reference to the Western Hemisphere in the Nahuatl language. Since our entire cultures were obliterated, many of us do not know what specific nation tribes we descend from. This does not mean we cannot collectively be proud of all the accomplishments achieved by our ancestors throughout Semanahuac. Because of these civilizations were derived from each other by influence, have common bases, and represent Nican Tlaca culture, heritage, and inheritance. Why is identity important? According to Siklali Silamina Anahuac on the importance of identity states, how we choose to identify ourselves reflects the knowledge and understanding that we have or don't have of our history. An identity tells a story, connects you to a culture, reflects your values, and most importantly, says how you connect to the world. 519 years of colonialism produces a people who are ignorantly label themselves with terms that benefit the colonizer and the colonial order. After genocide comes the ethnocide, end quote. Without an identity, there is no connection for us to our culture, values, and the world. Like a tree without roots, identity cannot exist without a strong foundation of culture and history, because history is identity. No history is no self, but to know history is to know oneself. And that is it.
Gracias, Mati, for sharing that. If we can open it up for a discussion again, just to let you know, we are live streaming our podcast right now on Facebook and on our YouTube channel. This is our very second podcast. So everyone that's watching this now and in the future, we thank you for that. And if you can stay tuned, please. We are trying to do this every month, once a month. And again, we're going to be addressing issues of identity, decolonization, white supremacy, and who we are as a people. So after hearing Brother Witiliolo's Sunday sermon, we want to open it up with discussion with Sister Shoshishiwit, Ayari, and Witiliolo and myself, and we can kind of share our thoughts about Nican Tlaca concept. But before we talk about the actual concept itself, it's important for us to understand that this idea of having one identity for all of our people, a collective identity of what they call pan-indigenous identity, it's something that's been historically thought of by our ancestors in the various lands of Semanahuac, which comes from the Nahuatl language. So we have different examples of our people, of our heroes, of our leaders, of our indigenous ancestors who actually thought about this throughout the centuries. So we want to start off first with Sister Ayari. She's going to be sharing some of her research as far as quotes coming directly from our ancestors, talking about the ideas of one people, one confederation as indigenous people.
Dime Chica. So, as my sister mentioned, I wanted to touch on pan-indigenism, but in the historical sense, by using the historical example of Tecumseh, who was a famous indigenous leader during the time period of 1700, 1800, when in America there was a lot of, the indigenous people were fighting the colonists. He had the idea of joining all the Indian tribes into one nation. What I thought was amazing of him while I was researching him is that he planned an indigenous confederacy from the Great Lakes all the way down to the Gulf of Mexico. And what I also find important is that he was an indigenous person from the north. And sometimes we try to kind of emphasize our differences instead of our commonality. And he saw that our commonality came through an enemy that was here taking our land. He felt that if we didn't unite in owning the land as one people, or being one people and not looking at our differences, that we would end up being divided and Europeans would easily take over our lands. So I'm seen as pan-indigenous is, historically speaking, is an idea that's not new. Even when he was a child, there were forerunners in his leadership that thought in this mindset. So there's actually a quote about this in a book called Tecumseh Life by John Shudden, and he said that, it says here that that his leaders, from his tribe, Shawnee leaders, were embarking exactly of the kind of pan-indigenous diplomacy from which he would one day be famous for. So it says here that they held conferences for intertribal conferences at their villages. Indians everywhere, they said, should be all one mind and one color. So even as a child during this chaotic era in our history, there were people trying to unite all tribes as one people. I mean, even technically, Sandino can be used for Nicaragua, can be used as an example that he felt that every quote-unquote Latin American country should unite as one.
Gracias, Yari, for sharing the quotes of Brother Tecumseh. Also, to expand on the need for a collective identity, we have to understand that the process of genocide in our case, it had a lot to do with, obviously, 95% of our population was wiped out. Those of us that survived were displaced, were forced to move out into places that we've never lived before. We were forced to be slaves in a lot of other countries. And so what happens here is a destruction of our tribal, national, Confederate identities that have been established for, centuries or thousands of years, if that. So we have to understand that it's really hard for us as Nican Tlaca people that have survived this genocide, for us to try to find who we are, for us to be able to trace our specific roots to our continent. And just to kind of share with you an example on this book called Facing East by Daniel S. Richter, he talks about how a lot of the identities that we know today were actually a result from colonialism and genocide. I'm going to read the following quote. Other groups that we know by such names as the Creek, the Cherokee, the Iroquois were relatively new social forms produced by decades of disease, warfare, migration, and resettlement. And nearly everywhere, people moved frequently. People move frequently to the extent that names of communities should often be regarded as addresses rather than tribal designations. So this just shows you that even if we're trying to claim a specific group of Nican Tlaca people, it's very hard under genocide because of the complete disregard for our traditional cultures, or our traditional languages, and our traditional identities. They were completely, in a lot of cases, destroyed. And we're not saying that everyone, lost it, but the majority of us did. And so for us, and as Tecumseh and other of our ancestors have tried to reconnect ourselves, at the end of the day, they realize, all of us are experiencing the same thing. We have the same enemy. We are being persecuted by the same people. So when you're going through this and you're seeing whatever differences you had, before the European invasion, it became basically meaningless, because now you're facing complete persecution, complete genocide, complete obliteration of your people connection to. So we have to be very considerate for ourselves as we're trying to decolonize and as we're trying to connect where we come from. Just to kind of bring on the concept of Nican Tlaca. The concept of Nican Tlaca, it comes from the Nahuatl language. We understand, that we're not trying to impose and just prioritize the Nahuatl language. But what we are doing is saying, unfortunately, in the system of white supremacy, The creation of nationalism has been completely rooted in white supremacy, settler colonialism. So nationalism tends to try to group everyone under one category, regardless of where we come from. That's a very European, very white supremacist view of identity. So in what we're doing here is we're all being grouped under this whole Latino thing. We're being grouped under this whole colonial national countries like Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, which were actual products of white supremacy and genocide. It has nothing to do with who we were as indigenous people. This was to designate the power of white supremacy, the power of European settlers, and how they chose to break our land up, and according to whatever nation they were going to create in order to give themselves power and resources and access to our land. So that's kind of the idea behind Nican Tlaca as a pan-indigenous identity. And by no means are we saying, we're not saying that you must abide by this. Everyone must call themselves Nican Tlaca. We're not saying that. We're saying it is a beginning point. And until we are free as indigenous people, as Nican Tlaca people, until we are completely free from Europeans on our land, we have to unite. We have to come together. We have to say we are indigenous once we are free. And we're hoping that very soon our descendants will experience that freedom. Once we are free, then we can talk about, okay, the Confederation, what nations are we going to have? What are we going to honor? Because obviously there was a lot of diversity in our continent. But until that comes, we need to protect ourselves under this identity, under a pan-indigenous Nican Tlaca collective identity. To expand more as far as the literal translation, and just to let you know, in the future we are working on presenting a specific presentation on Nican Tlaca, completely backed with sources, the whole works of Nican Tlaca. Today we want to have a conversation about it. But Sister Shoshishiwi, she's going to be sharing the work and the research that she's finding out, and kind of understanding, where does this concept come from? Where can we find it? Where can we study more about it? So, Sister, if you can share that with us.
Namishika. Thank you, Sister. Yes, I had recently been reading We People Here by John Lockhart. And what I found what was interesting in that book is it does mention Nican Tlaca, and it also mentions the foreigner, non-Spanish foreigners, which I'll get that term right now. But it's funny because I noticed that they use Nican Tlaca as a generalization for the people here. And I thought that it was interesting because there's two different translations. There's one from Nahuatl to Spanish, and then there's another from Nahuatl to English. They vary in different ways, but they all mean the same thing. And as far as this book, I really enjoyed reading, and I'm still reading it, so I'm still working on that. But what I enjoyed about it is that the term Nican Tlaca does come up several times, and it is used in the way that it describes us, the people here, because prior to any conquest or anybody reaching our shores, prior to that, we just knew each other as we, the people here. And so I also have a quote that I want to read, and this one is actually by Stafford Pohl, and this is regarding the book In Our Lady of Guadalupe. And this is basically how Pohl references that the term Nican Tlaca was being used well into the 1600s. The story of the Indian miraculously restored to life at the time of the dedication parade contains no Spanish loanwords and uses the older term Nican Tlaca for natives, which also debunks the myth of the Virgin Mary. So I find that interesting how there is no other word that is describing Nican Tlaca, literally describing us, the people here. So that this is from In Our Lady of Guadalupe. And then the other book I was talking about was We the People Here. The reason why these words, Nican Tlaca, for me, I choose as an identity, and I have since the moment that it's been brought to my attention that this is a word that paraphrases who we are. For me, it's just, there was no other way to describe who we were prior to conquest. There was no other way to say just us, and that makes sense because who else, why would we identify each other in different ways Why would we say like brother or sister, or, for different, I don't know, regions, tribes? I'm sure there were other words, but for me, it really felt like this is something that I can use as an identity. This is something that I could use to gear away from the Latino Hispanic term. This is something that I can use for my children to gear away from these colonial terms that dictate who we are. And I just feel like the term Nican Tlaca itself, there's so many resources. Like I said, I'm still researching, but there's so many resources out there which keep pointing to Nican Tlaca. So why not use it? So for me, I think that with this research and the research that's to come, and breaking down the term Nican Tlaca, what it means and what it meant to our ancestors, I kind of feel like this is the better term to use.
Tlasokomati, Sister Shoshishiwi. Just to kind of add to that, we have to remember that identity is power, that the identities that we have been given, we've been forced to identify with Hispanic, Latino, raza, mestizo, nations that were created by white supremacy colonialism, which are Mexico, Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua. All of those concepts were birthed from nationalism, and nationalism that is stemmed in white supremacy. So also even the term Native American or American, we're not American. The concept of America was not part of our culture. It does not exist in any of our languages. So we are trying to give power to the language, to the languages, to the identities, to the concepts that were given to our ancestors. We want to honor our ancestors. We want to honor identities that connect us to the land, because this is our land. We don't want to have identities that connect us to Europe and that connect us to the colonizer. We want to have identities that connect us to who we are. And that is important, because they want us to use identities that connect us to them, because they don't want to recognize that we are the people that descend from the ancient civilizations, that we have ancient connections and ownership to this land. So we want to say we are Nican Tlaca and honor the various indigenous languages and various indigenous identities that come from this land. We don't want to empower colonialism and the tools of colonialism, which is the identities of genocide, which is Hispanic, Latino, and other, white settler colonial nations. We want to empower our ancestors. We want to empower ourselves. We want to reject colonialism, even American. We are not American. To add to that, I want to pass it over to Sister Ayari, and she's going to talk about her understanding of Nican Tlaca and how it works with her, and it honors her background as well.
I want to touch on that, but as a person that is from quote unquote Central American descent, specifically from Nicaragua, growing up, I was more aware of our history, or Nicaraguan history in the 80s, more because it's due to resistance to American imperialism, and then of course because in that time period the people's philosophy was based on Sandino, who also in his life fought against American imperialism. But I also felt a detachment to my history of what happened before American imperialism. But I would always see people of Mexican descent, I felt in a way that they could look at images and connect to them. For example, in a lot of Mexican communities, the Mexica sunstone is used as a marker or an image that you could identify back into your roots, and having that as a Nicaraguense, is not of a big of a connection to that. But as I started studying, I started realizing that I was connected back to the ancient people of Teotihuacan. Once that group of people broke off and then became the Pipil and then the Pipil Nicarao, and I started seeing all these connections. And then I ran into the term Nican Tlaca, which I like because it was a Nahuatl term, which people in Nicaragua did speak a broken version of Nahuatl. So I like that because it connects all our people as one people, rather than I am Nicaraguense, so I'm very different to a Mexican person. I never understood those ideas of seeing our people like that, because at times you can't tell from appearances who's who until somebody speaks in their accent that they learned from their country of origin. And then as I started studying, for example, we're bringing up nationalism. the flag of Nicaragua, it actually represent a lot of. It actually represents European history of what when the Criollos decided to make the European state known as Nicaragua. On the flag, you see some volcanoes. You see a liberty hat, which is actually like a Greek symbol that was used by the French here in America and used by several other European groups. The volcanoes or mountains on the flag actually represent the states the Criollos created. So, and then even the colors on the flag are actually based on the flag of Argentina, and we know that Argentina was founded on the genocide of our people. So I started to back up and I say, well, this flag doesn't really represent me because it actually represents European history and the history that has terrorized my people. So I started backing up from seeing myself in that nationalistic manner. And then as I started researching more about the indigenous people, there's a famous person known as Nicaragua. And even then I questioned if this person even existed, because in Nahuatl there's no R. So there's even discussions between scholars if this person even existed. And if our name is based on someone that doesn't exist, it becomes very, like, almost, like, oh man, this is really fake, And even the fact, like, are we gonna walk around being named by a conquistador, conquistador is a friendly term for them. They were more like pirates and murderers. Are we gonna name ourselves based on what this guy decided? Like, to me, that started making absolutely no sense. So the term Nican Tlaca, because it does have a historical proof of existing, I thought that, well, we easily allow other people to label us Latino, Hispanic, Mestizo, Raza. So why are we allowing other people to do that for us? Why don't we just pick a term that is historically real, that does represent our ancient roots?
That's Gamatia Yari. And I also want to pass it over to Brother Witiliolo. If you can share your thoughts on the concept of Nican Tlaca and maybe expand on what you wrote for the Sunday sermon.
Okay. The Mexica sister, thank you. This term, Nican Tlaca, I also identify with it because just going on my, own personal ethnicities across the continent, Nahuatl is the most prevalent language, or it's a branch of the Nahuatl language that my ancestors spoke. So again, I to me that label seems more fair. I mean, I still identify as Mexican because it's Mexica, and it's honoring that civilization as well. But also, when you study our people, you notice that a lot of their terms that they use just for themselves mean the people. It means human beings. Just to give another example, like, a part of my ancestry comes from California, and like the San Diego area, and the people known as the Cupeños, which is the Spanish word. I can't even pronounce the real word because it's so long and complicated, but the language, so in their language, it means people who slept here. And then also another group of people that I come from is called the Luceño, but in their own language, it's called people of the West. So again, you see, our people identifying themselves with people here, people who sleep here. So it's that idea that we're from this land, we're from here, we sleep here, we're from the West, we're from the North. So whatever our people identify with, it's always this concept of whether it's a collective term or it's a personal term for their own selves. It's still like we are identifying ourselves with our land and who we are. And just to, again, I want to just address, like, I guess the critics or the haters, or that there's always these things with Nican Tlaca. It's been like, now it's being more, since it's being more promoted, it's also being heavily more attacked. So again, the most common one you hear is, well, I'm not a Nahuatl speaker, so I'm not going to use that word. And it's fine, you don't have to use it, but then it's like that, like, disrespect, like, well, we're not Mexica, I'm not going to use it. And it's like this anger and defense, and I get it. We want to, protect our own identity. And people say, well, I prefer this word. And I say, okay, cool, like, use it. I'm not gonna attack you and say, well, I'm not Purepecha, I'm not Hopi, so I'm not gonna use that word. So, and I think we forget to support each other. We forget to, kind of like, we don't honor each other. But if someone says, oh, you know what, that's a cool word, but I want to use this, you know, it's like the way we communicate with each other is not being respectful. And, you know, we have to realize that, you know, there's hundreds of languages in our continent. So if someone has another word for it, then, you know, more power to you. Like, yeah, continue supporting whatever label you want to use, but at least as long as it's not, you know, Latino, Hispanic, or Native American, or Indian. Like, if it's in your language, you know, more power to you. And also, or people say, well, it's Nican Tlaca spelled wrong, or it's, you know, grammatically incorrect. And, you know, again, like, Nican Tlaca is classical Nahuatl too. So if you're studying contemporary Nahuatl now and you say, well, Nican Tlaca doesn't make any sense, or it looks off, or it looks wrong, or it doesn't translate the same. I mean, you know, again, the language evolved 500 years from the 15th century. So again, it might be a little different. And so again, if you want to use the contemporary version of Nican Tlaca, again, that's fine. You know, or people, you know, want to say, what else do they say that are common critiques that, you know, there's other critiques that people use, but at the end of the day, we should all support each other, support our own languages, support each other's languages, and, you know, and so, you know, just being supportive of each other. And just going back to my sermon, you know, about, you know, labels. I mean, I recently had a conversation with someone. You know, I was at a birthday party, and he was like, "Well, why are we Mexican? Like, why are we indigenous? Like, it doesn't matter. Like, we're all human anyways." And again, that comes from, you know, again, being destroyed. Like, we know we're human, you know, but we don't know we're indigenous. We don't know this is our land. We don't know that our identity is tied to this land. And because we've been destroyed, we think, well, we're just human anyway, so why does it really matter? And it's erasing like who we are, because again, that's what the colonial powers want. They want us to not identify with a label that connects us to this land. So they want to be general and say, oh, well, we're human. Well, okay, we're human, but like we didn't forget that. And what makes us beautiful as humans, that we are diverse and we're all different, and it's okay. But especially on this land, you know, despite our differences, we are connected to the foods we eat, to the languages, to this land. And if we say, well, we're just human, then we're just being generic people, and we don't. So we're people without a land, without a culture, because we're just human. And, you know, so again, like being identified with the correct labels are important to us, because that's how, like Sister Citlali was saying, identity is power. And if we just act like, well, we're human anyways, then again, we're not. We are giving up our power to our land, and that's what, you know. I mean, the powers that be know exactly who we are. They know that, especially with Mexicans, because again, when Mexico was invaded and it became part of the U.S., I mean, there was specific, like people were saying, like, you know, I remember I was reading about this Mexican man who was suing the U.S. because he wanted to be a citizen, and they were saying, no, like he's Aztec, he's full blood Indian, like we don't want him here. So again, it's just like removal of our people. Like, they don't want us here, and they know who we are. They know they know that we are from this land, but yeah, they want to call us different names and make us illegal and create all these laws against us. And it's like, once, you know, people want to call it human rights and immigrant rights, and it's like, no, this is indigenous rights. And, you know, when you take away that label, like indigenous, then it seems like it's a human right issue or immigrant issue, and we're not really saying, no, this is our land, we belong here. And I think that's more powerful than saying, well, we're all immigrants, or we're just human beings, treat us well, or, you know, we want to work here. It's like, no, like this, like we have the right to be here, and, you know, we should demand our place in this land, and not beg to be part of it. Because I mean, we are here. Like, this is not, you know, we're not from anywhere else. And people say, well, if you don't like it, go back. And like, go back where? Like, this is where we belong. And, you know, there's historical proof that our people have been migrating for thousands of years and creating different civilizations. And, you know, like, it's whether it's from the north and went to the south, or from south to the north, like, we are here. And so that's why, you know, Nican Tlaca is important, because we have to claim the rights to this land. We have to claim our spot. So that's all.
Brother. Just to add to what he was saying, I wanted to share a quote from Facing East from Indian Country by Daniel Richter. And in his book, he basically talks about trying to give perspective of so-called early American history through the eyes of a Nican Tlaca. And obviously the book has its faults, and I will, share that in another presentation. But he does give primary sources of our people who in the mid 18th century, which is about 1740s, 1750s, we're actually talking about pan-indigenous identity as a result and as a reaction to they see the damage being done by European colonialism. I mean, it's only the right thing to do. It's the logical thing to do. You see that your people are dying, your people are being enslaved, you're surviving biological warfare. So obviously you say, what's the root of these problems? It's European invasion and European colonialism. So to quote him, he talks about there was a movement of what he calls prophets, or what could be called as Nican Tlaca shamans of northern Semanahuac. And they were talking about completely rejecting, and again, this is in 1740s, 1750s. They're talking about completely rejecting European, anything having to do with European. They didn't want nothing to do with it because they saw that the people were being killed, they were dying. It was like the end of our world as Nican Tlaca people. So just to quote for him, he says that they rejected the increasing colonial influence in native government, culture, and economy in favor of native independence. They also learned that despite ancient rivalries among nations and speakers of different languages, they were all Indians. Central to nativist belief was the idea of separate creations, that the master of life had made Europeans, Africans, and Americans distinct from one another and purposely placed them on distinct continents. From this core teaching flowed several important implications: that Europeans had no right to consider themselves superior to Indians, that the Bible was its accounts of creation and salvation were true, but only for the Europeans for whom it was intended, that native creation stories and modes of theology were equally true and revealed only for the indigenous people, and that mixing of European and Indian ways was the source of native people's current problems, and the key insight above all, that Indians were a single people with common interests that transcended national rivalries. End quote. That is from Facing East from Daniel Richter. So he's basically talking about pan-indigenism. We're seeing how our ancestors were reacting to obvious the damages, the detrimental effects of dealing with Europeans, with these invaders. And yes, we have to honor our ancestors. We have to honor who we are. And we have to talk about contemporary issues. Let's talk about DACA. Let's talk about, this is a revoking of a policy that was meant to help indigenous people. The majority of the people that were served by DACA are our people. And what we consider it to be is, this is a modern day Indian Removal Act. We have to remember that white supremacy, it's besides killing 95% of our people, it polices, it displaces, it replaces, it enslaves our people to exist under these categories of identity that don't belong to us. They want to just treat our bodies with complete disrespect, not honor who we are, not honor our land and our connections to our land. So we have to take ownership of that. We have to understand that we have to be Nican Tlaca. We have to be assertive of being Nican Tlaca. And like Brother Witiyolo was saying, we are taught to be thankful for the U.S. and thankful that we're here. But the thing is, this is our land. So this is about us coming back to what belongs to us. And we have to remember that there was a genocide of 95% of our people. So if they're complaining that there's a lot of us, well, imagine how many more of our people would have been here if it wasn't for European invasions and colonialism. Our world would have been completely different. But this is where we are. We are under colonialism. We are under occupation. And we must start cleansing ourselves from this European, this white supremacist colonialism ideology that is infecting us, because it's killing us. It's literally killing us. I wanted to ask Sister Shoshishiwi if she could talk about the case of her specific case on how she identifies as Nican Tlaca and why it makes sense to her, and maybe talk a little bit more about how you are teaching it to your kids. I think it's important that we talk about how we continue this knowledge and bring it over to our children, because they are the next generation of warriors. So if you can just kind of share your experience with that.
Mishika, yes, for my children, I make sure that they gear away from the Latino, Hispanic ideologies and these terms that kind of promote self-hate, I guess. That's the easiest. That's the way that I break it down for them, is calling themselves Hispanic, calling themselves Latino. That promotes self-hate, and I break it down to them why. They have over, I think it's been, I want to say 5 years, the last 5 years, have been decolonizing themselves, and it's been harder for them because when I brought up the term Nican Tlaca to them, they said, well, where's that from? What does that mean? And I taught them where it was from. I taught them what it means. And they asked, well, how come my friends don't know what Nican Tlaca is? How come they call themselves Hispanic? How come they call themselves Latino? Well, it's harder for me to explain that when the world isn't changing yet. But over the years, they have come to terms with, yes, we are Nican Tlaca. There's been several times where my nieces have asked, is it okay if I put Nican Tlaca on the paper? Because their teachers would say, where are you from? Where's your family from? The About Me projects. And they would put about them their Nican Tlaca. A lot of times there's been instances where their teachers have said, no, well, if you're Mexican, you're Latina. There's plenty of times where that's happened. And my niece just refused. She refused to be called Latina. She told her, I'm Nican Tlaca.
That's right.
And she did. She refused. She stood up and she said, I am Nican Tlaca. I'm an indigenous woman. She even said woman. But she said it with pride. And I was very glad to see that. The decolonization process is not written down. It's not easy. It's very hard, especially with children, because for those who have children, that they're looking at you for answers for right now, for what is it? And when we're decolonizing ourselves, it's a little bit harder for us to answer those questions. All we can do is make sure that they're true to who they are and true to their ancestors. That's what I teach my kids. And I tell them, if your ancestors were here and they feel these ways about they were to feel these ways about these terms, would you just respect them by keeping the terms, or would you say, no, we are Nican Tlaca, and respecting their legacy? And they all say the same thing, they would respect the legacy. I feel kind of like it's our duty as not just parents, but as aunts, uncles, family members, to make sure that our children know truly and fully who they are. Times are changing. I have seen the term Nican Tlaca being used a lot more. And so now my kids, they're changing. They change their mindset to confusion, to they're determined to change things for themselves. And I feel like for them, I'm very happy, because it was very hard at first. There was many questions as to why this, how come it's not in my book? How come I'm being taught this? And then I would watch documentaries with them. Some that maybe were a little bit harsh to watch with children, but again, like I said last time, I don't think that we have the opportunity to shield our children from these truths. We don't have that. And the truth is, it's better to teach them now what they're going to be facing as adults and armor them with knowledge. And that's, for me, is what the term Nican Tlaca has done for them. It's given them a sense of pride back, that they know that they're special and different in that way from their friends. But then they want also still have those questions. Well, how come my friends don't know that they're special and different? And I just tell them, when we do the projects, like I mentioned last time, like instead of doing the the San Juan Capistrano, the mission project, instead of doing those, we did like the Mexica calendar. We mimicked it on a clay model. Things like that have the other kids wondering, well, how come she doesn't have to do her project? How come she gets to do something which looks fun? How come she gets to do that? And then that conversation gets to happen in other homes. So whether we're parents, teachers, aunts, uncles, it's our duty, and that's what we could add to the experience for these children.
Yep. Lazo Comati, sister. And I'm going to ask Sister Yari to add her final thoughts to this conversation on Nican Tlaca.
As a people, we know that when Europeans came over, they literally almost exterminated all of us. And after going through genocide, we still had to go through things where they would take away our languages, take away of dressing, just take away our way of life, to the point of some people not knowing that they're indigenous, even if they look it, which is pretty amazing because you don't see that happening in other people's culturs. So I want to touch on Tecumseh once again, because when I read his quotes, you could see that he is trying to express that if we don't come as one people, we don't think in a pan-indigenous manner, then we will disappear. And that's actually the reality of things, that one day we could disappear if we continue in this genocidal process. You know, maybe people aren't being all murdered in the streets in the same way that when Columbus came over, but we're slowly losing our identity. We're slowly losing all that. We already lost, or even the way, you know, we don't know. A lot of people have people in their family, they don't have anybody that speaks an indigenous language. So let me read this quote from Tecumseh. The annihilation of our race is at hand unless we unite in one common cause against a common foe. The only way to stop this evil is for the red man to unite in claiming a common and equal right to the land, as it was first and should be now, for it should never be divided. Another interesting thing about Tecumseh is that he thought that no indigenous person has the right to sell the land, not even to another indigenous person, and for sure not to a European. That's just important to know. Here's another quote. Let us form one body, one heart, and defend to the last warrior our country, our homes, our liberty, and the graves of our father. So that's the reality that we live in, that if we don't unite as one people, we'll disappear. So for me, using the term Nican Tlaca for people that have lost their identity is one important step into reclaiming your identity.
It looks like we dropped audio. Rick says that we dropped audio.
Okay, so we are...
Let's check and see if we can do comment. Can we see anybody?
Yeah, we're just checking. We're good? Making sure you can still hear us. Okay, so just to add to what Sister Ayadi, Sister Shoshishiwi, Brother Witiyolo were saying, we want to conclude. I have just some ending thoughts. Is that we have to remember that it's been 524 years since this initial attack on who we are as an indigenous people. So it's not easy. You know, we're not trying to, you know, just iron everything out and say, bam, you know, here's this easy solution. It's not easy. For all, those of you who are decolonized, for those of you who are waking up, you know it's not easy. You know that we are waking up, that we are decolonizing, that we're constantly dismantling these lies. We're constantly dismantling this whole Christianity, Catholicism. It's deep, you know, it's deep because we're really impacted and infected with this white supremacist ideology. And we have to put it in a perspective to say that we are the survivors of this genocide. And we are the survivors because our ancestors resisted, because our ancestors gave their life. So we have to honor that. We have to honor the legacy of resistance. We have to honor the legacy of our ancestors that refused to give in, that refused to just bow down to white supremacy. And we have to understand that the concept of genocide, as Raphael Lemkin, and we addressed this at our last podcast, it has to do with identity. He talks about that genocide is not just the physical killing of a people. It's about killing and destroying any aspect of that person, of that group of people. It's about killing their identity. It's about taking away their resources. It's about keeping their kids away from learning who they are. So it's multifaceted. This whole attack on our people, it's multidimensional. It's not just about physically killing us. It's what's being put in our minds. It's what we're being taught, what we're being indoctrinated with. So we have to understand that this is a reaction, that we are surviving this genocide. And as survivors, we have the right to call ourselves who we are. We have the right to refuse colonial terms. We have the right to say, I'm not Hispanic or Latino just because I've been forced to speak this. And we have to understand, Our ancestors were killed for speaking indigenous languages. Our ancestors were persecuted for practicing indigenous ways. That is documented by Europeans themselves. They had no shame in describing how they were killing us and how they were persecuting us. So we have to understand the trauma behind this process. Why are people now seem to be happily in their identities as Hispanic or Latino? Like they seem to be happily embracing it. It's not something that happened overnight. It is a process and a product of the trauma of white supremacy, of genocide. And we have to understand that part of this whole thing about trying to erase our numbers, trying to, belittle who we are and our presence on this continent, it has to do with representation. It has to do with making it seem that there's not as many of us as they think. We are a lot, and we are demographically not represented in the terms Hispanic or Latino. If anything, they want us to die out. They want to use our labor. They want to use our bodies. They want to use our foods. They want to use what comes from us, but they want to erase us as who we are as a people. They want us to exist as fake white people. They don't want us to identify with being indigenous. They don't want us to identify. They don't want us to fight back for what belongs to us. And what we are here to say is that we are the future. We are the majority. We will be the majority. We need to fight for representation. We need to take ownership of who we are, of our identity, of our land, of our heritage. And with that, I want to end and thank all of you for tuning in. Again, this is the first time that we did a YouTube and simultaneously on Facebook podcast. We will do this again month after month. We are going to keep having special guests. Huitziliolot, I want to thank you for coming. Thank you for joining our podcast today and sharing your words and your thoughts of your Sunday sermon. No, we're not talking about church. We're talking about decolonizing. And I want to thank Sister Shoshishiwit, Sister Ayari. We're very happy. We're very proud to be here. We're very excited to come together and to be able to talk to our people, to, share these thoughts with you. And please know that when we have these conversations, this is just not even the tip of the iceberg. Like, there's going to be a lot more presentations coming, a lot more thorough presentations where we're going to break it down. This is just a conversation to let you know that we exist, that you exist, that you're not alone in this matrix of white supremacy, that we are waking up, we are decolonizing, and we're taking back who we are. We're taking back our land. We're taking back our identities. So again, Tlazo Kamati, thank you for listening. This is Citlali
Shoshishiwi.
Huitziliolot.
Yarichaska.
From Nican Tlaca Women Warriors Fight, Nican Tlaca Liberation. Thank you so much for tuning in. Stay strong, decolonize.